Thea and Come Armageddon feel very much like a spiritual autobiography. Is that kind of how it felt when you were writing them?
More or less. My agent said to me, write one for yourself. Don't think about whether anybody's going to like it or whether it's what it should be. Write something you want to. I don't know quite why she said that, but that was the result. That was what I had been aiming at all the way along, right from the beginning. So I thought, right, go for it. I kind of got permission.
Well, I think with, the great thing about writing books and being successful is that, the publishers tend to like to put you on a little bit of a treadmill, and there comes a point where you do have to refresh yourself creatively.
Yes, you do.
And Thea in particular had an interesting genesis, and it sort of moved quite a long way from another book, another incarnation.
The very first thing that I did, yes, which was only a sort of a trial run, very much a preparatory, and it must have been 20 years or so between the two, and if I hadn't grown a good deal in that time, I wasted it. The original concept was much, much richer by the time I got to write Tathea. And then Come Armageddon really is the same story because it was just too fat to go into one book.
Yes.
Tathea was the first half of her life, so to speak. And then Come Armageddon, she rested for 500 years, which sounds a little bit odd, but there was a reason for it, and then came back and completed the whole journey. It is the spirit's journey from the first time you consciously think, who am I?
Yes.
Did I come from anywhere? Am I going anywhere? Is there a purpose to this? To discovering what that purpose is, and then fulfilling the whole purpose and reaching the end of mortal life.
Yes. I seem to remember, and I don't know whether this got left behind thinking about it, but at the time we talked about Lucifer and Lucifer's journey and what you believe as, that
Well, he
sort of light bringing.
He didn't come under that name, he came under the name of Asmodeus, and it was more darkness than light he brought. But the light doesn't shine without the darkness.
No, true. The other characters, where do they come from?
That's with many different ones. The great love of her life, Israfel, came from a poem, I think, by Poe. And none could sing divinely well as the angel Israfel. And I've always loved great, great voices. But he had to be the person who guided her towards finding the truth and bringing it back to the world. The truth being the purpose of human life. And I suppose I couldn't write a great story of spirit without a love story to it as well.
Of course.
She is the one who makes that journey, and a lot of life's journey I think we have to make alone. I think if you're not doing it alone, in a sense, you're not even really doing it.
Perhaps, but in that case, do you feel that we have unseen spiritual guides? Is there a Virgil to take us through?
I don't think so. He took her through the search in the pre-existence for the truth to bring back to earth, but she lived most of her life without his particular help. And when, in the second half in Come Armageddon, when he came back as a human being, he was as human as anybody, with no more light or knowledge than anybody else has.
Right.
So no, there's nobody to hold your hand all the way through, I don't think. I think the essence of growing up is that you have to do it on your own. There may well be people watching you, but they can't interfere because they take from you that growth. I mean, if you're teaching your child to walk, if you hold its hand all the time, it never really walks on its own.
True. And the other characters, some of them seem embodiments of certain points of view or qualities that you wanted to put across.
Yes, they were. They were there for a story purpose. And the ones I had the greatest fun doing were my own version of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Because I don't believe that the spirit of evil's desire is to destroy us physically. I think it's to destroy us spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And so I thought the first one to come would be the spirit of corruption, which is very, very slow and subtle. And that was Ulciper, and I made him look beautiful. But when you cut his flesh, it was just spongy and there was no blood there, no life. It was corrupted, decrepit, decayed without ever appearing so on the outside. But it was only just, skin's depth underneath. The second one to come, when corruption has set in well, was Azrub, and he was more fun because he was hideous to look at. He was a dwarf, very, very heavy, very squat, with goat eyes, and he always little white nail-bitten hands, always sort of doing this. And he could read your mind and know what your dreams were. and he could make you think you'd achieved them. He was the Lord of Delusion, and he was so heavy that when he walked, even on stone, he left footprints in stone. That's how heavy he was. But he could make you believe, like Lotus Eaters, he could make you live in ashes and eat ashes and think you were eating good bread. So things slowly wither away whilst you think everything is fine, and that does happen.
Absolutely.
It's so easy for us to see what we wish to see and not realise what the reality is. Therefore, we never deal with it. We never face it. We never fix it. So we don't see it. The third one was Cassiodorus, who was big, brutal, with a coarse mouth, thick golden hair that curled. And he was a mixture of rage and fear, because many of the most ugly things we ever do, we do when we're frightened. It's the preemptive strike. And the civilized people striking at barbarians, the barbarians were literally people who had very little culture and moved from place to place, built nothing, created nothing. But real barbarism is of the heart. When you make the preemptive strike so that you justify the destruction you cause. Well, they would have done it to me first if I hadn't.
Yes.
And some of the most dreadful things we do when we're frightened. We let go of all our principles to be safe.
Yes. Well, that's one of the theories that's the cause of the First World War, was a preemptive strike out of fear.
Yes. Well, we do it now. Don't even want to get into present day politics, but how many things these days do we do?
Absolutely.
Well, they were going to attack us. We've got to do it to save ourselves. And the last one, and the only one that Asmodeus, who was a devil, who does have a sort of speaking part, as a character, the only one that he is afraid of is Yaldabaoth, who is the Lord of Despair. And I think that is the ultimate slow death, because once you believe you cannot succeed, there is nothing to fight for. You are doomed to failure. You are worth nothing. Then that is the end. You can't fight that, you don't fight that. And, there are bits and pieces in that just catch me right in the gut. And I didn't realise how close to reality I really was when I created those in my mind. I think despair is the most crippling of all. And how many things fail because we believe we cannot.
Well, it was a chance not just to create your own set of metaphors for discussing this, your entire philosophy, but to sit down and really
work out exactly what I believe in. A couple of things I'd love to tell you, if I may. There's very little magic in it. It isn't really fantasy, and certainly not science fiction. The sort of magic that occurred in Tathea, towards the very end, she'd stolen back the book which she'd brought, which had the conversation between God and the devil, which states what the whole purpose of man is, and the devil keeps saying it won't work because of this and this and this, and God says, but I thought of that. That's the answer. It has been used for power instead of for enlightenment. She steals it back, and with the very last of her companions and followers, they escape in a small small skiff, which just have one cabin underneath. And they have hired this to take them away from the war and the destruction, and those who are after them. And they've paid the crew to take them to a certain place. And several days away from land, they come up above deck at last, thinking they'll be safe. And they realise they're nowhere near where they paid to go. They're somewhere else that's extremely dangerous. And Zenobiel says to Tathea, we must persuade them to take us to the place we want to go. And he puts his hand on the helmsman's shoulder, and when the helmsman turns around, he's not a mortal man. He is a spirit of the unrepentant dead. And she, as Tathea says to him, God has already offered them everlasting life and joy. What can we offer them? And then he says, well, we must do something to them. And he realises the whole crew are the unrepentant dead, raised by necromancy by one of their greatest enemies. And she says they're already facing hell, eternal aloneness in the dark. What can we do? And what I'm trying to say is there is nothing that God or the devil can do to you that equals what will you do to yourself by the choices that you make as to who you are. And that, to me, is a much more vivid way. I suddenly could scare myself a little.
Yes. Yeah.
And then in the second one, it is Armageddon. It is the end of the world. And Sarachar, who is the adopted son of Tathea, has grown to manhood, and he chooses to open hell to provoke the war, because he realizes the last heroes, the 6 of them who will fight the war, they're mortal. Asmodeus can wait as long as he wants. All they've got to do is wait and they die. He must provoke it now, and he voluntarily goes to hell and opens the gates, and the war starts. But he he goes knowing that he cannot come back. And it is dreadful. It is not sort of torture or flames or ice or whatever. It is just total aridity and anger. And Tathir can go to him in vision and says, if you find Tornagrain, the man who betrayed the father you knew, and forgive him, you can get out. I can't, never, never. That was the ultimate betrayal. And then eventually he realizes, I must, if I do this. He finds Tornagrain, he works very hard and forgives him, and he comes back to the portal, and he goes through it, and he's still in hell. And Tathir says in vision to him, I can't come again. I know now I was wrong. You must do more than forgive him. You must redeem him. In other words, you can come out and you can bring him with you. And that's so, you forgive for yourself, you redeem for the other. And he goes back again. He says, I can't. And he does go back, and he brings Tornagrain with him. He teaches him to be different. And he comes out. And it is Tornagrain who, at the very end of the last battle at the edge of the world, who faces Yaldabaoth, the Lord of Despair. And Tornagrain stands there at the end of the earth in this last thunder and lightning and volcanic darkness, and he says, I am Tornagrain, the redeemed of God. You cannot touch me. And he is the one who defeats despair in the end.
Well, that's a very interesting theme, because it not just, particularly in Come Armageddon, you're taking people to the absolute brink. Yes. And we're, dealing with absolutes in this instance. You're not just exploring the idea, but actually taking it to its furthest conclusion. But you're talking about, on the one hand, it's not enough to forgive, but you actually were required to love.
And to teach that person to be different.
Indeed. And at the end, the idea that even if there is nothing left on the earth, somebody's got to love it.
Yes. Well, that's when there's nobody left. We've had tsunamis, sandstorms, ice storms. Everything is destroyed, and it's volcanic darkness closing in. And there's nobody left but Asmodeus and Tathir. And he says to her, we've done it your way. And you've got the power. You're empress of nothing. And she said, I didn't want the power. God has abandoned the world. Somebody must love it. I will love it. And that is the ultimate victory. And when she says that, I will love it not because it deserves it, but it needs it. He loses all power and he disappears. And he's gone. And slowly the keys of the world which he had has dropped, and they become a crystal of light. And the whole world resurrected appears. And all the people she's loved, in both Tathir and Come Armageddon, they're there, and God says to her, welcome home, my daughter.
Yes.
She still has the book.
So how close is this to your own beliefs?
It's absolutely there. Absolutely. If I come to the point when I think, what do I believe? That's the only thing I've ever written. I go back and reread. I think, yeah, I meant that.
And you've had quite a lot of interesting feedback from people from other faiths.
I have, basically Christian, but I can remember somebody who wrote to me and said, now that I've read that, I understand my own faith. And he was Roman Catholic, which I'm not. I'm LDS, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I had a nice Lutheran lady say that she bought umpteen copies so everyone in her family could have one.
Yeah.
And I've had another Protestant, but I can't remember what particular denomination, Presbyterian, I think,
right,
who said, I have to give the sermon in my church this Sunday because we only have a minister every third or fourth. May I, please, be my guest?
Yes.
Because it's not specifically denominational, it's not specifically Christian.
No.
But it is absolutely, I am Christian, but I wanted to make it, this is what I believe,
right,
for every human being.
Well, it's also a profoundly philosophical book, so people can come to it and test their own beliefs against it.
Exactly. There's one point when she's translating the book into the tongue of particular people, and somebody says, couldn't we, you're making hell so difficult. And she says, well, if I make hell less deep, then I make heaven less high. Do you want that?
Yes, absolutely.
No.